But yeah, I'm so glad you guys could join me and everyone else this evening to have a little chat about perennial propagation. Yeah, my name's Nick Reardon, and yeah, I was born and raised here in Anchorage. Go O'Malley Malamutes. And back here living on these amazing Denina lands. I may have met some of you. It's kind of hard to tell through Zoom sometimes, but my mom's a longtime cultural anthropologist in the state. My brother's an artist around town, and my sister-in-law makes chocolates occasionally in Anchorage. But I've turned into a gardener and a bit of and working for Alaska Community Action on Toxics professionally, which is a local environmental health and justice organization. And they work on all sorts of issues related to those topics. But specifically, I'm running their organic and community garden program, Yarducopia. And that's, that's kind of what I think is bringing us together today. There's one more person, Amanda, asking to join. Yeah, if you guys, I mean, I'd be curious if you have a minute. I'd be curious how you heard about the event as well. I'm always amazed at how word travels through the food and gardening community here in Anchorage and Alaska. So anyway, if you have a minute and you want to type that into the chat, I'd certainly be curious. Yeah, how the word came to you. But I'm glad you're here. I'm not suspicious or anything. And I was saying to Sherry and Terry that I was checking with them to make sure to see if they got their cuttings. I know about 24 people had joined the event, and I checked in with them, and I know I didn't expect so many more people to join. So if you are still interested at the end of this, half hour, in getting some more cuttings, you can talk to me, and we'll probably have some ideas of who else you could talk to track some down. So just to kind of the activity for the next half hour or so, I was going to give a little sense of what perennials are, but some favorites here in that grow really well in Anchorage. And then kind of one of the reasons I like them so much is that they're propagatable, that you can reproduce them, which is both fun in and of itself, I think, but also kind of economical and another neat way as a gardener to observe and interact with the plants. And they make great stocking stuffers. You can make a whole bunch of them and give them away to friends. Maybe not at Christmas time. It's probably a better gift around, an Easter present perhaps, or as we head into the summer and in the fall. So perennials. All I mean by perennials, I'm not a horticulturalist, an expert in that. I've been gardening pretty seriously for 5 or 6 years, and I read and think about it a lot. But perennial to me, I'm just talking about something that's coming back year after year, barring any sort of visitation from a moose or a rabbit or a lawnmower that might end its life a little prematurely. And so that's a lot of them might be really familiar to you, like raspberries and strawberries and rhubarb. Trees and bushes are perennials. They come back year after year. Obviously, that's somewhat dependent on your climate. There's loads of delicious things and beautiful plants that are perennials at lower latitudes with warmer temperatures and more mild climates. There's fewer as you go to higher latitudes. They're different varieties, and so that's what I'm going to talk about. In terms of varieties and stuff, is things that work well here around Anchorage. And so some of that's temperature can kill things. The length of the summer can result in things not thriving. There's a variety of parameters, but basically, the ones that like it here. So the pros of perennials, other than coming back every year, is a bunch of them, their root systems are alive in the soil, even through the winter. The upper portion of the plant's going dormant. And that's kind of obvious. We see, the top of the rhubarb dies back, the leaves fall off your currant bushes and your raspberry canes. But the under the ground, it often will stay a little, right around freezing, a little bit above freezing as you go down into the soil. And so there's still life going on in there. There's lots of microbes, lots of little critters, and they're able to maintain a relationship with that living root in the soil. And the more we learn about microbes, the more we learn about fungi, that those relationships are wonderful in the soil, and they provide a lot of benefits to the plant. They provide a lot of benefits to the whole ecosystem. So it's nice to support those. So that's another reason perennials, I think, are quite neat. there's also the aspect that because those roots are alive in the ground, not only do they come back next year, but they come back so often stronger than they were the last year. And with no help from you, you can often ignore these plants quite a bit. Again, like rhubarb's the classic one in Alaska that you kind of just plop it in the ground somewhere, and the next thing you know, you got too much rhubarb on your hands. So the roots are expanding, and what you get eventually when the roots just keep growing like that, and you get a stronger and stronger plant year after year as the roots become more established, is something that can handle you cutting it back or digging it out of the ground and splitting it. Or another way, it's kind of, you're in there kind of messing with its life, and taking little pieces of it that you wouldn't want to do to an annual necessarily. You just wouldn't expect an annual to recover very well. Whereas a perennial has a lot of resources under the ground, kind of like a glacier, not so extreme with the whole, 10% above water, 90% of the ice below water. Perennials, it's not quite that extreme, but I think over time you do end up with probably equal, if not quite a bit more biomass under the soil. So yeah, the fact they've got that resiliency, great for propagating those sorts of things. So that's a nice aspect of them as well. Oh, and in terms of feeding them, just overall labor. I mean, some of you may be starting seeds right now. Some of you may be, just planting your garden, but, saving time in the spring and the summer for this is the time I'm going to have to allocate to my garden. And so perennials can be wonderful in that way because they don't require as much thought because they're going to probably pop back and produce berries or leafy greens. They'll produce, and you don't need to feed them. With the exception, wood chips is a fabulous perennial food. And talk about something that's pretty easy to get your hands on. Just, a couple inches of wood chips every 3 years. How's that? That sure beats a dog. I mean, when it comes to pets, that's pretty low maintenance. And those wood chips will slowly break down. And as a slight technical note, I mean, you're trying to cultivate a fungally dominated environment around perennials, whereas annuals, you're trying to cultivate a bacterially dominated soil ecosystem. And so fungally dominated, you just want a bunch of wood chips down there. That's the lignin in wood is what the fungus is going to eat. Whereas if you want a bacterial dominated, those bacteria really get to work. So you want to put on, a bunch of organic matter. It decomposes. This is the composting that organic gardeners are all about. And it's you got to have inputs every time you want to compost. So that requires labor. It can be really fun. I love it. I compost every year, but I also really appreciate that some of my plants don't need that level of attention. So, yeah, so now getting kind of to the propagating itself, or even just some of the varieties. This isn't to like make anyone here an expert in propagating. I'm not an expert in propagating, but there may be some varieties that you haven't come across and or that you do know of, but you may appreciate a little bit more in thinking about them this way. So on the kind of like vegetative, like leafy green sort of perennials, I mean, like chives are one that probably a lot of folks have seen. And those ones are neat in that they'll grow into clumps and you can split them. And so after, your chive plant gets kind of big, you can just literally just take a shovel and separate it. Now you have two, or separate it in 4 ways. Now you have 4 and replant them. That's a little bit of an invasive method, the splitting. So rhubarb's like that as well. It's growing you this kind of leafy green thing that you can eat. You eat the stalks, obviously, but you have to go in there with a shovel to split, and it does set back your original plant, a bit. It's kind of invasive to actually dig it out of the ground, cut it in half, and put it back in. Amazingly, these plants survive it, but it's a little bit invasive. And so that's so chives would be one like that. I mean, mint is another great one that you guys have probably had. It grows crazy in Alaska at times, and so needs to maybe be kept in a container depending on your circumstances. But again, just a delicious plant for having mint tea all winter. Sorrel is one of my favorites these days. There's the native variety called Doc, but sorrel looks really similar, and it's just the French word for sour, I think. And so it is this lemony flavor. It just comes up as these broad kind of hand-shaped greens that just keep coming up and coming up. And you can hack at that thing and you can cook sorrel, saute it, you can have it fresh. I eat it all the time in the garden. It's just like a nice lemony lettuce that you didn't have to plant, and it'll make little baby sorrels if you have any exposed bare soil around it. You can also, so that's a way to kind of create new ones. Sorrel grows pretty well from seed as well. So some of these perennials, you just, like you would grow a kale plant or something, you can plant sorrel seeds, buy them over the counter, that sort of thing. But highly recommend a couple of sorrels. They come up really early in the spring. There's a few others that are kind of more maybe, a personal, if you're taking notes here, but like lovage is supposedly a perennial celery. Good King Henry is kind of a perennial spinach. These do have kind of a distinct and maybe acquired taste to them, but neat plants nonetheless. And those ones, again, you're just starting these from seed, and their seeds will fall on any bare soil you'll kind of leave around them to propagate. So the ones that, so for this class, I did, I offered to distribute a little bit of pieces of perennials. And for that, I was handing out, I just put in some bags, some red currants, black currants, and gooseberries. These are berry bushes. And, there's other varieties out there. People grow jostaberries, or people grow, honeyberries are getting pretty popular these days. But these are, 3-4 foot tall berry bushes that produce once during the year and give you, delicious fruit. So they're nice to have around if you have space. They're not producing, maybe the most amount of food for you, but it's what they do make is stunning. And there's tons of different varieties of these things. But what I really find neat about currants and gooseberries is how vigorous they are, how much they want to live, and how well they do in Alaska. And so propagation of those, I went out and dug into them just about a week or two ago I have a little garden at my parents' place. And so I excavated in there and I found the currant bushes and the gooseberry bushes. And I just took scissors or, little secateurs, little snippers, and cut off pieces. And I don't know how this will come across in the video here, but this is some of the pieces that I took out. I kept them initially in Ziploc bags with in a cooler full of snow, just to keep them basically around freezing as best as possible, basically keep them dormant. When I dug them out of the snowbank, they were dormant. And most of the pieces that I have here are kind of, approximately pencil width. You don't want anything too spindly. It probably won't be able to grow roots in time. And what I have here is just them sitting in a jar. This is how much they want to live. They're the buds that formed last fall are breaking, and so there's some leaves popping out. And it's a bit of a race in time here, because these stems have no root system. And so the beauty of perennials is that they have this living root system. Well, I've removed that benefit, and so they have the leaves, and they're out of luck. Unless they're able to grow roots, they're out of luck. And so I popped them into this little container full of water, and I've been leaving them on the sunny windowsill is all. And my hope is that in about 2 weeks, they'll have little white roots coming out. Again, the visual here is maybe a little bit hard, but along the base of this stem, it kind of looks like they've got goosebumps. So there's all these little bumps along the stem, and they're becoming increasingly pronounced where it's been soaked in water. And over time, little roots will start to pop out of here. The problem with having them budding out is that these leaves, as they form, are going to continue to grow. The bud had a certain amount of carbohydrates, sugars and energy and stuff to create the leaf a little bit, but the leaf's going to continue to grow, and that's going to need more carbohydrates and food. And so it's actually going to take resources from the stem that might otherwise go into root production. So this isn't the best way in the world to get the most cuttings to work, because the leaves are waking up, and there's sort of a competition between creating roots and creating leaves. Some people go to great lengths to keep these cuttings dormant. So they'll basically like heat the bottom of this stem and keep the upper portion cool. There's tons of different ways people have thought of to do this. One example would be, I could just have kept all these things as a bundle, and never just right when I cut them, basically tied them up into a bundle, gone to a little raised bed that I have where the soil is loose. That's kind of hard to find this time of year. But let's say fast forward, I take these out of cold storage when the soil is loose, and I would bury them upside down. And slowly that raised bed would warm from the top, and roots might form here, and while the buds are remaining dormant. For currants, for things that are relatively easy to propagate, I just don't go to the trouble. I just think it's a numbers game. I may not get every cutting to go. Even if I get 50% of them, I'm a pretty happy camper. I just noticed that in the chat, not only are people sharing where they heard about it, but oh, fabulous. There's also some questions, and I will get to those. I don't have too much more to share here, and I can shift over to that. I haven't forgotten that there's the question aspect to it. But so that's a neat aspect, I think, and these would be considered a hardwood cutting, pretty tough. And it's nice because this would be a pretty big cutting, and it has a lot of energy locked up inside of it to contribute to both these leaves that are popping out because they think it's summer because they're inside my house, and some root growth. So I'm optimistic that these thicker cuttings will perform well in this pretty lazy jar method. You could also just put these cuttings directly into soil, into little 3x3 or 4x4 pots, a potting mix, something that's got some air in it, like a perlite peat moss mixture, something kind of light and airy. You don't want it to be just like heavy soil you might have in your garden, or like unfinished compost or something that's pretty heavy and it might be prone to molding, or like a fungal kind of thing going on in there. There's other ways to encourage it other than using a potting mix, or like I was describing, kind of controlling the temperatures, heating up the base of the cuttings. People use hormones sometimes, like rooting hormones. And the only one I'm going to go into here, I tend to just avoid that. But the one that I do think is really neat is willows naturally have a rooting, like they produce an abundance of rooting hormone. We've got an abundance of willows. You can take willows, chop them up into little inch-sized pieces, put them in a mason jar, leave it in your fridge, put it on the windowsill, wherever, for about 24 hours, and then get rid of the stems. And that liquid, if you expose these cuttings to that liquid, you've extracted auxin, you've extracted a really common growth hormone from those willows, and you can now expose these cuttings to it. And so kind of a fun little tidbit, a free way and kind of a maybe more interesting way to get your hands on rooting hormone. Other times, you can buy these things from the store. They come in, alcohol based. A lot of them are stored in talc. You can get your hands on them that way too, and they do. I think they do work. There's studies and there's tests about it. But again, I'm not going to go into all this into the weeds on that because it gets a little messy. But another aspect of propagating, or kind of this reproducing, that I think is neat to touch on is ways that are maybe even lazier than this taking of cuttings and putting them into a jar. This is nice if, let's say, your neighbor has a currant bush, and you're really eager to get started. You could go get cuttings now, or ask me, ask a friend. But if you've got time on your hands this summer, look around. I can't recommend this enough. Look around and meet somebody who has some berry bushes, who has these kinds of sorrels, mints, lovage, and go and taste them and see if you like them. And not even just, do I like currants, but do I like, this kind of currant? There's, a dozen different kinds of each of these types of plants, probably at least, 3 or 4 that grow well in Anchorage. But taste them and say, like, oh, I really like this red currant bush. I don't like that red currant bush. But if you find one you like, this is essentially cloning. So you will get the same berries as the ones that you had there, assuming, the plant doesn't struggle for some other reason, which a lot of these, they don't seem to take a lot, I think, to set them back, other than maybe a moose just eating them entirely. So that's a nice way to go. Go and actually experience them, go taste them in the summertime, the varieties you like, and then that'll help guide what kind of propagation you might want to use. Or obviously you can go to the store and support local nurseries. I do that every year, and sometimes I'll grow them and I'll taste them and I'll say, oh, fabulous, I'm going to make more of these. Sometimes I'll taste it and I'll be like, actually, I regret purchasing this, or good to know, but it's not my favorite type. Some plants will like currants and gooseberries, their lower branches will actually they'll just grow low horizontal branches that will touch the soil. And when these branches touch the soil, they'll start to root. And at some point, that plant will be well enough established that you can just chop it off. You could, as soon as you see roots, you could chop it off and put it in a pot and let that grow over a summer, and it will become a big old currant bush or whatever it was. So that's a pretty good way to do it too, is if you have an existing one or your neighbor does, go over there and take your little like croquet wires, but just some sort of little wire, put a rock on the branch, shovel some dirt over the middle part of the branch, in some way just get it down onto the soil, and it will root out no problem. So that's a really easy way. You often prune these lower branches anyway because the berries will touch the soil and rot. So using these lower branches to, it's called layering. You're just pushing the branches down on top of each other, and those lower horizontal branches touching the soil can become new plants. One last way that you can kind of force this, or that you can't force, but another kind of propagation though is suckering. And this is simply that the roots of a plant, as they extend further and further along, they eventually get far enough away from the plant that they're prompted to send up a shoot upwards and break the soil. So like a cherry tree, an Evans cherry tree, will start to send up little cherry trees around your existing one. So if you have a friend who has beautiful Evans cherry, be like, could I come over? Like, to let me know. Avoid it with your lawnmower or whatever. Like, don't mulch over this, and you just can dig those out. And obviously, it damages a little bit of the existing root system of the tree, but it tends to happen further away from the plant. The only trick here is you need to identify that it's actually a sucker and it's not a seed. So if it's really far away from your cherry tree, it's probably just that a bird ate some of your Evans cherries and pooped out a seed, 15 yards away. And now you have a cherry growing up. Neat, it's a cherry tree, but anything that's been pollinated from a flower in somebody's backyard, the actual what is that variety? Is it going to be an Evans cherry? It'll be some sort of cherry. It might just be one that only the squirrels and the birds want to eat. So having it attached to the root system, having it attached to the branch, ensures that that it's going to taste the same, that it's going to behave the same. And so currants do that, gooseberries, these other woody bushes, a lot of them will send up suckers over time. It's going to take a few years for them to establish themselves and really get to that point where they're where that's the way that's going to be, the roots are far enough away that they won't be experiencing, the hormones that prevent them from doing that, but and they'll start sending up new plants. So that's a fun one. But yeah, speaking of seeds, starting from seeds is a viable option for you can make 48 rhubarbs in your home just by buying a pack of rhubarb seeds or something like that. But trying to start currants from seed, trees from seed, I just leave that to the professionals and buy the baby ones sometimes, or propagate from existing bushes. So knowing which ones do. I'd say raspberries are essentially, suckering. They're sending runners along, and then more plants come up. So that's one we're all familiar with, almost to a fault, that the raspberries are so vigorous. They're sending roots in every direction and popping up with new plants, often outside of, the confines of where we might have wanted those raspberries to exist. The other ones I've mentioned aren't maybe quite as bad. Strawberries are, we don't force that one to propagate. It just does it again, kind of on its own, sending out runners. And there's ways to kind of encourage those to take or not. But and there's wild perennials too, nettles and high bush cranberries and things like that. And you can propagate these too. Sometimes that's a nice way to, not disturb the plants that exist in those public lands, but be able to bring little pieces of them back and then cultivate them on your own property. That can be an enjoyable way. And so one last tidbit before maybe looking at the questions here is a little bit off topic, is just self-seeding annuals are also wonderful plants that they may die every year, but they produce so many seeds that's kind of like they come back every year. And I just think of like borage or nasturtiums being pretty fabulous in that way. But that's maybe a topic for another time. But so yeah, I encourage you guys to get out there and buy from local nurseries, chat with your neighbors and friends. Give me a call, and we can go on garden tours. The Alaska Master Gardeners. We were just talking last night at the board meeting to there's going to be garden tours this year with them. The Alaska Pioneer Fruit Growers. I work with that group as well, and they're also excited to have these garden tours. When you go on these garden tours, sometimes it's when the fruit is ripe, and you get a taste like, oh, this kind of honeyberry is really good. They're all good, but this one is my favorite. And so say hello to that person, become their friend, and you might be able to, take a cutting of their plant, or just ask them where they bought it. Anything's good. So yeah, I think that's the bit I wanted to share with you guys, and sort of maybe plant the seed, so to speak, of these different ideas. And so I'm just going to have a look here at the questions to see what's popped up, but feel free to chime in as well. Oh, neat. I'm seeing, yeah, Terry's saying that she was propagating mock orange cuttings last year. That's pretty fun. Yeah, I haven't tried that, but those have such beautiful, if I'm thinking of the same plant, such beautiful flowers. Yeah, some plants like our Saskatoon or serviceberry, and I think maybe some citrus, you actually propagate the softwood cuttings. And this is a little more time sensitive because, this just like a fresh green shoot. But I love serviceberries personally. There's generally enough, you can go and pick them or something. But I still, it's nice to have some bushes at home as well. And so I'm intrigued. I haven't actually tried working with soft cuttings, but I'd like to learn more about that. I think a rooting hormone might be more helpful there. Barbara's asking if when is the best time to move perennial? And yeah, that is a good question. I think sometimes it's urgent and you just got to move it. And depending on the type, you're having a renovation done, or the fence is being moved or something. A lot of the plants I've talked about thus far I brought them up because I like how hardy they are. I like how resilient they are, and so they can probably be moved at any time, and they're not gonna die, assuming that you move them to another hole or get them in a pot with good soil and actually look after them. But yeah, the best time is definitely going to be when a plant is dormant. That's generally that's kind of the accepted knowledge with a lot of these things. So once the leaves have fallen off, so spring and fall end up being kind of the time to do a lot of this. But I do think that, yeah, you can. There's some wiggle room, especially with these hardier varieties of plants that I'm talking specifically about. There's wiggle room in there. That's one of the things I like about them. Oh, what's this? I've heard you can bury a branch under a bed for food. Is that like? Oh, well, Julie, chime in here. But I'm thinking you're talking about burying a branch like to let that woody material decompose. I know you can certainly.
Yeah, just like as an alternative to finding mulch, if you have like tree branches that have fallen, but assuming you haven't made the garden bed, you can dig down and bury a couple branches, and that'll help feed the soil.
Totally. Yeah, I think the benefits of I think having wood on the surface, chipped wood, lots of surface area, that's probably going to be your best bet in that. Again, yeah, high surface area, a lot of points for the fungus to get in there and break it down. When you bury the wood, it's definitely going to get moist and get broken down. And I think it's a really fun idea when you're working with perennials. In an annual bed, I know people do this, and I always got to scratch my head. What is happening if you bury wood in a bed where you're growing annuals? Just with this kind of rule of thumb I have that you're trying to encourage bacteria to grow, and the wood is probably encouraging more fungus. But yeah, organic matter, it's a big lump. I would say I'd encourage more of that in soils everywhere. So I couldn't agree more, Julie, on that front. But I'm glad your dog is also paying close attention. An avid gardener. Probably the one who's burying these sticks around your yard, actually. The question comes from.
Likes to partake in the garden.
Of course. Let's see. Terry's also asking, the cuttings that I left for him are a lot bigger than I've grown previously. Is 6 to 8 inches a more robust cutting to take than 4 to 6 inches long? Yeah, so like, yeah, size of cuttings to take. I think that there's some again some wiggle room here, but yeah, I've heard 4 to 6 inches is adequate. You essentially just need one bud and then some stem below it to root out. So I think I've heard of people getting away with a half inch, an inch, as long you just need one bud, and then and that's going to be your, where this new stem is going to come out, and that and the old stem is where the roots are going to come out. So I think if you're really if you're getting the heat where it needs to be and keeping the bud dormant, you can probably get away with even smaller cuttings. But for my windowsill kind of method, yeah, I think 4 to 6, or even these ones are longer. Some of them are 10 or 12 inches even. And I'm a little worried here actually that I might have too many buds. It might actually be better, given the size of my jar, to not have this upper part covered in leaves and just limit it to these lower buds. So it probably depends a little bit on the size of container you're working with, or if you had your 6 to 8 inch one, bury most of that, bury 6 inches of it and only have 2 inches at the top with 1 or 2 buds exposed. Same with the 4 to 6 inches, bury 4 inches of it and only have 2 inches at the top exposed with the buds. That would be my recommendation. And then a heat mat underneath it would probably help the rooting speed up a bit. But again, with currants, they're so vigorous, I'm not too fussed. My gooseberry bush should be pruned. When is the best? Oh yeah, exactly. So same thing when pruning, when moving. Yeah, the fall is a great time, and if you can't do it then the spring. But I do with these plants sometimes it's just when does it fit into your schedule, Barbara? When can we actually go and dig this up? And when do you have the place prepared to move it to? I wouldn't lose any sleep about it. They're pretty hardy plants. And maybe propagate from your gooseberry so you have some backups. And that's another way to kind of maybe feel a little more confident about it. What's the best way to harvest a raspberry plant growing where you don't want it? Oh yeah, so I could give it away to my mother a lot. You should give them away to me as well. Tudor Elementary, their request for this spring is to put in a huge row of raspberries. And currently I have 0, but I will, they're raspberries, so I think we'll find some. And you were wondering about best way to harvest them. Oh man, yeah, you can just go in with a shovel. I usually just dig a hole to the size of the pot that I'm going to plop it into to transport it. But I've had no trouble with like a basketball sized root ball, just in a garbage bag, or just in a big 5-gallon bucket, and walked away like that. Raspberries are pretty good. It is a nice idea to trim it back, like again, less vegetative growth. Really cut it down to maybe a foot or 2 feet or something like that, so that when you do plant it again, the root to leaf ratio is healthy. You don't want just a little bit of root system that you've just kind of shoveled and then a huge plant sticking up. So, which is sometimes the case. Raspberries could grow to like an 8-foot tall raspberry in someone's yard needs a lot of roots to stay healthy. And they have those when undisturbed, but once we start moving them, that's problematic. Ooh, that's great, Barbara. She says she's going to have some gooseberry clippings if they would root and survive. Yeah, you can just see if they're dormant. That's the key. If they've started the bud out, it's kind of like we should probably act now. But if the buds haven't leafed, I think it's still an acceptable time to take cuttings. And yeah, the best cuttings to take are often the ones that you're going to be removing the branch anyway. So yeah, it could be a good opportunity. Sometimes it's nice to know what kind of gooseberry it is. Sometimes it's nice to know that the fruit's delicious. But yeah, that's great. I appreciate the generosity. Best way to split up a perennial. Yeah, the splitting. I mean, get in there and try it out. It's again nice if you got plants in the background and you're not worried you're going to kill something. The exploratory mission, I think, will clarify what's under the soil and what you're going to find. But I'm always amazed with rhubarb, for example, which is a regular one to be split. You go in and there's just so much root. It's like a football or something of root mass, not like all these little tendrils, but a real solid chunk. And so I've used a saw, I've used just a shovel and split it. sometimes I leave as much of the plant in the ground as possible, and I actually just go in with the shovel and kind of remove a third of the plant, just cut it vertically with the shovel, the spade, and then pull it out, leaving, you know, the rest of the pie of root mass in the ground. And that's a nice way to do it. Other times I just take the whole plant out of the ground and I divide it up into, you know, 4 new plants or something like that. At that point, you've removed it, so you kind of see how much you have to work with. And this is Kathleen. Oh, wait until they're a certain size. About the raspberries from Kathleen. Yeah, they're, you know, with all these plants, it helps if the perennial has been around for 3 years or something, 2 or 3 years minimum, so that they do have an established root system, so that you can take these cuttings, so that you can disturb them in some way. Otherwise, you're running this risk. I once bought a rhubarb, for example, from, I brought it from Bell's. I was really excited. I brought it home. I was like, oh, I bought this rhubarb for $15. I'm going to split it into 3 rhubarbs. And now I'll have a rhubarb plant for $5. You know, this is what a genius idea. And I took it out of the pot and I shook away the potting soil, and they had just split it. So they got to that idea before I did, obviously, because they're a nursery. And so what I had was just a little piece of rhubarb that I couldn't split at all. I was still delighted to have a rhubarb plant, but anyway. So, but after 2 or 3 years, this rhubarb plant, I can dig back up and I can split it. And so it doesn't take too long. Have the long view. Should we tell? Oh yeah, certain size. So yeah, give them some time. That's, you know, but some certain things will grow so fast. I mean, depending on your soil conditions, if the soil is good and they're getting some attention, you know, again, the mulch, the wood chips and stuff, you'll watch them grow and there'll be excess basically. Oh yeah, that's a great question, and I didn't address that at all. Is it best to plant a rooted cutting in a pot first, and then transplant? And yeah, if you have that time and availability, which I don't think is too much of an ask, totally put it in a pot. I've done it sometimes where I've just directly put the cuttings in pots and skipped the whole jar of water thing, but it was just a space issue. So yeah, I like to vet them, see which ones actually root, and then the rooted ones go into the pots, and they almost all take. If you're going to put them into pots, always be aware of hardening off your plants. It's so sad you'd propagate all these little currants. You'd have a whole box of them, and you'd put them outside because they're these hardy currants, and all their leaves would just bake in the sun, and they get sunburned like I do every summer, and their leaves would fall off and the plant would die. So that's sad. So harden them off, you know, put them outside for 4 or 5 days in a shady side of your house. Let them get exposed to some wind and some, you know, indirect sunlight, and let those leaves toughen up. Or root them indoors and then put them in pots outside. And there's still going to need to be some hardening off probably, but that might ease it a little bit, so they haven't created too much growth indoors. But anyway, hardening off, it's important. Let's see. Oh, good. Yeah. Julie, you want some cuttings? This can be arranged. We could hook you up with Barbara, and I've got some too. I still have some more in my cooler, and I'm happy to share. I could always go get more too. I'm assuming they're starting to wake up maybe under the snow, but oh, cool. Yeah, red gooseberry cuttings to offer. Oh, some green ones. Yeah, we could do a swap. And Barbara, which part of town are you in? If you want to share, but we could. Yeah, awesome. So that's pretty easy to get to. Yeah, does anyone else? I feel like I've reached the end. I've reached the end of the chat at least. Did anyone else have any other questions about these sorts of things? I'm happy to go off topic as well. Yeah, when sharing these things, I mean, this is more of just, you know, some plants do carry little plant diseases, and so it is nice when you're to clean your tools and that sort of thing. It's just good practice when you're dealing with woody plants. There's various fungal diseases and stuff, so you can just use a little like isopropyl alcohol and on your snippers before you take them to somebody else's garden or something like that. But yeah, it's kind of a rare issue in Alaska, but if things keep warming up, this may become an issue that we have to address increasingly, is being aware of diseases. We're spoiled at the moment. If you didn't know, we're spoiled in that we have so few pests and problems. address with our like fruit trees and fruit bushes and things like that. Although I'm sure you've all seen the cutworm. If you have grown currants and gooseberries and things, there's a caterpillar that'll come in and I think I have the name right. Anyway, but there's a green caterpillar that comes in and just defoliates the entire bush. It's quite spectacular to watch. And you can either try to fight those bugs, pick them off by hand. But my friend Christine Wilcox told me she's like, this is great. The birds come in, anyway, it doesn't harm the plant ultimately. The berries still ripen. You can still eat them. The plants are really tough. And I think lots of critters come in and just start to gorge on these little caterpillars eventually. But it is a little upsetting to watch. They're really hungry. Well, yeah, anyway, welcome more questions. And also if you guys want to take off, feel free. This is, but yeah, definitely let me know if you do have any raspberries out there. I'll be on the lookout for Tudor Elementary. And same with splittings and cuttings. It's always nice way to meet your neighbors and kind of share a little time with folks is to go out on these tours or just knock on your neighbors' doors and check in. Yarducopia our next and I think last like winter workshop with this Zoom format. We'll have one more at the end of the month talking about just neighborhood composting programs. And so a few have started up over the years. There's some existing ones at the muni level, but just have a chat about that. And hopefully a couple people who have started these kind of, street scale composting programs will join us and share a little bit about how they did it, why they did it, that sort of thing. I don't think we'll have somebody from Solid Waste Services, but we're all probably more or less familiar with that citywide program. But that'll be neat. That's at the end of the month, and otherwise, then we'll probably shift into more in-person events for the summertime. Yeah, so glad you guys could join us too. And yeah, check out ACAT's website, Yarducopia's website. Feel free to ask me questions. And yeah, if you like the presentation and stuff, we always delighted if you could donate and chip us a buck and help us keep providing these things for free to people all over Anchorage and Alaska. Oh my goodness, Patty Saunders has a gazillion raspberries. That's perfect. This is what we needed to hear. Once the soil thaws, they'll probably be I don't think they're in a super big rush, but it should be pretty fun to get a good row at Tudor. Yeah, raspberries are never never a problem. It's always fun. And yeah, actually I saw Tim Pritchett popped on here of Tim's Plants, Produce, and Worms. He grows and provides a lot of the perennials to Alaska Mill and Feed, and he sells them on Craigslist and is a wealth of knowledge. He has a Facebook group. And so yeah, Tim's where I've certainly bought and been given perennials visiting him at his place. Cool. Yeah, he sells them on Facebook too. He's awesome. I couldn't agree more. Yeah, Tim's great. And I haven't touched on varieties very much in this session, talking about, I've just been saying currants, gooseberries, whatever, but when it comes to strawberries and raspberries in particular, in conversations with him, he knows, which varieties grow well in Alaska, which ones used to, which ones grow well now, the benefits, the fact that some ripen in June, some in July, some in August, how you can have all three and have strawberries all year round. That sort of stuff is really getting into the details, which those details are out there. And I'm happy to talk about them, but I know there's many people who know a lot more about it than me, and we don't need to dive into that. I think pick your plant and you can go learn about it. Well, cool. Ashley, I've got everybody's contact info, but it looks like, I'll chat with you, Patty, and Barbara and Ashley and Julie about these raspberries tomorrow. I'll see if I can touch base, but that'll be fun. Well, again, yeah, thanks so much, guys. It's fun spending a little bit of the evening together. I'm still got a little sunshine on the porch. So I hope you guys have, get a little sun out there this evening too. Have a good night.